Welcome to West Film. We bring you the best movie recaps, reviews, ending explained videos, and hidden details from your favorite films. If you love great movies, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now grab some popcorn, and let's jump into today's movie. He believes his presence at the funeral isn't optional, it's necessary. As Mike leaves the meeting, he briefly crosses paths with Vice President Alan Trumbull. Later, back home, he promises his wife that once this assignment wraps up, he'll leave the job behind for good. Soon after, he joins President Asher as they head off to London. During the flight, Lynn puts Mike in charge of the president's overseas security detail, making it clear that nothing can go wrong. Meanwhile, in London, the head of security briefs his team. He walks them through the situation and reminds everyone just how serious this mission is. They're not simply guarding one official, they're responsible for protecting some of the most powerful people on Earth. Air Force One lands at Stansted Airport ahead of schedule, catching Security Chief John off guard. Mike quickly reassures him, explaining that the fewer people who know the president's exact movements, the safer he'll be. London has been turned into a lockdown fortress. Police line the streets, helicopters patrol overhead, and snipers are stationed across the city. At the same time, leaders from around the world are arriving for the funeral. When President Asher reaches the city, he's greeted warmly by fellow dignitaries. But behind that formal welcome, danger is already closing in. A man dressed as a police officer secretly plants an explosive on the Canadian Prime Minister's car. Moments later, it detonates in a massive explosion that sends shockwaves through the area. Almost simultaneously, men disguised as King's Guards open fire, killing the German Chancellor along with several civilians. It quickly becomes clear that terrorists have infiltrated London's security forces, posing as Metropolitan Police officers and Royal Guards. As President Asher approaches the cathedral, heavily armed mercenaries emerge from hidden positions and launch a full-scale assault. The streets erupt into chaos, vehicles explode one after another, gunfire rips through the crowd, and the cathedral entrance is sealed off, trapping the president outside. Mike reacts instantly. He takes down several attackers, then moves with Asher toward cover behind an SUV, continuing to fight off the assault while enemies close in from all sides. Another armored threat joins the fight, but Mike's quick thinking and sharp instincts neutralize it before it can do more damage. Then two ambulances race onto a nearby bridge and explode within seconds. The blast is so powerful that the bridge starts to crumble and collapse, killing the Japanese official in the process. Elsewhere, the Italian Prime Minister, hiding in terror inside a chapel, is caught in another explosion and dies instantly. The coordinated attack spreads across the city as the French president's boat is blown apart on the water in a fiery blast. Back on the streets, a vehicle arrives to rescue Ben and Mike. They jump in and speed off, desperate to escape the war zone London has become. But the attackers are already waiting. Bullets hammer the car from every direction. The driver fights back using the vehicle itself, forcing one enemy car off the road, but then a swarm of motorbikes surrounds them. During the chase, one biker crashes violently and is thrown straight through the bulletproof glass, creating an opening the attackers use to fire inside the car. The driver is hit, leaving Mike and the president in even greater danger as the escape grows more desperate. With the driver wounded and no safer option, Mike climbs behind the wheel and takes over. He steers through the chaos with precision, forcing several pursuers off the road. More motorbikes close in, but Mike keeps just ahead of them, using every gap in the street to survive. After taking out the remaining attackers, he and President Asher finally reach a waiting helicopter, board quickly, and lift off, leaving the chaos below. The scene cuts to a news report as broadcasters deliver the grim aftermath of the London attack. The world is stunned. 5 major world leaders, including presidents and prime ministers, have been killed. As the story unfolds, attention turns to Amir Barkhouti, the man behind it all. Despite the drone strike from years earlier, he's still alive. He calls his son, who remains calm and confident, assuring him everything is going exactly according to plan. Soon after, Cameron escalates things further by cutting power across the city, plunging London into darkness. Back in the US Command Center, Vice President Alan Trumbull orders the nearest units to respond, but they're still 2 hours out, meaning Mike and the President are essentially on their own. The terrorists keep hunting them from the ground and the air. As the President's helicopter flies over London, the attackers lock on. One of the escort choppers goes down under heavy fire. The President's helicopter releases flares to dodge incoming missiles, but the attacks keep coming and its defenses start running thin. In a desperate move, another escort helicopter draws a missile toward itself, sacrificing its crew to protect the President. But the danger isn't over. A Stinger missile finally strikes the President's helicopter, sending it spinning out of control before it crashes into a park. Back at the command center, American officials watch the disaster unfold in horror. Against all odds, Mike and President Asher survive the crash, injured but alive. Lynn isn't so lucky. In her final moments, she tells Mike to keep going and protect the President no matter what. Mike and Asher climb out of the wreckage and try to reach their security team, but the communication lines are dead. Knowing enemies will be closing in fast, they abandon the crash site and disappear into the nearby woods, using the darkness for cover. Back at the command center, Vice President Trumbull gets a call he never expected. It's Barcoy, alive and fully in control of the terror unfolding across London. With cold confidence, Barcoy explains that this is revenge for the drone strike that killed his daughter, and gives Alan a choice: hand over President Asher, and the attack stops. Trumbull refuses without hesitation, making clear the US won't negotiate with terrorists. Meanwhile, Mike and Asher keep moving through the city. When they run into a police officer, Mike suddenly attacks and disables him. Asher, shocked, demands to know why, but Mike points out the man's weapons and gear, proving he's no real officer. He tells Asher there's an MI6 safe house nearby where they might find shelter, and with no better option, they head for the subway. Their escape is cut short when more attackers show up. Mike reacts fast, tossing a smoke bomb to blind and confuse them. In the chaos, he launches a grenade, then finishes off the 3 enemies left helpless on the ground. Moments later, a radio crackles to life on one of the dead attackers. Mike picks it up and realizes Cameron is on the other end. Rather than staying quiet, Mike uses the moment to send a message. He forces Cameron to listen as he kills Cameron's brother, making it brutally clear that anyone coming for the President won't walk away. Back at the command center, Alan studies a satellite image and notices how Mike is holding his gun. He realizes Mike is sending a coded signal meant for MI6, and quickly searches for nearby safe houses to pinpoint where Mike and Asher are heading. As they push through the city, Asher, fully aware of how dire things have become, makes a grim request: if capture becomes unavoidable, he doesn't want to be taken alive and executed on camera for the world to see. He asks Mike to kill him first rather than let the terrorists use him as a symbol. Soon after, British officials reach out to Trumbull. Together, they draw up a tactical plan, pulling all official first responders off the streets, so anyone still moving through the area in uniform can be treated as hostile, giving the military clearance to eliminate them without hesitation. Mike and President Asher finally reach the MI6 safe house, where Agent Jacqueline Marshall meets them at the door, quickly bringing them inside and securing the building. Once settled, she plays them a coded voice message from Alan Trumbull, containing details only he, Mike, and Asher would know, proof it's really him. Alan explains an armored convoy is on its way to extract the President safely. Marshall then reveals who's really behind the attacks. When Asher hears Barcoy's name, his expression shifts with recognition and regret. He immediately understands the connection, painfully aware that this violence traces back to the drone strike that destroyed Bakori's family. A short time later, the safe house alarm signals that a team has arrived outside. Mike checks the security cameras, but something feels off. Zooming in and studying the men closely, he realizes they're not the rescue team, they're enemies posing as friendlies. Without hesitation, he heads for the armory to prepare for the coming attack. He orders Asher and Marshall to stay low and take cover. There's no time to explain. The fake rescue team is already moving in, and Mike opens fire immediately. He drops the first mercenary quickly, but the second puts up a tougher fight, dragging Mike into a close, dangerous struggle. At the same time, another attacker below spots the movement and joins in. Mike keeps moving with controlled precision, sliding across the floor, changing angles, taking down several more enemies before they can surround him. Just as one attacker nearly gains the upper hand, Mike turns it around and overpowers him. With the safe house no longer secure, Mike, Asher, and Marshall rush toward an underground vehicle to escape before more enemies arrive. While Mike and the president fight to survive, Agent Marshall starts digging into the security breach, determined to find out who's been feeding information to the attackers. Meanwhile, American officials get a major break. They trace an abandoned-looking property using far more electricity than it should, and connect it to one of Bakori's old business operations, confirming his location. Back in the streets, Mike and Asher race through London. Spotting enemies blocking the road ahead, Asher floors the accelerator. Gunfire erupts around them, bullets tear into nearby cars, and vehicles burst into flames. But they keep pushing forward. Then, without warning, a truck slams into them from the side, flipping their car violently. Attackers rush the wreckage and seize President Asher. Mike fights back hard, but he's outnumbered. Just as things look hopeless, Trumbull's strike team arrives. Mike quickly tells them the president has been taken, and without wasting time, they gear up for a rescue. Back at London Security Headquarters, Agent Marshall restores their surveillance system using a special access code, surprising and impressing everyone in the room with how quickly she regains control. In a deserted warehouse, President Asher sits tied up and held prisoner. Cameron looms over him with total confidence, promising the world is about to watch his execution. What he doesn't realize is that Mike and the rescue team are already positioned outside. Mike's radio crackles to life. The chief inspector warns him to slow down. Nearly 100 armed men are inside, but Mike isn't interested in waiting. The president is running out of time, and the assault begins. Mike and the team push forward with discipline and force, clearing the outer defenses and taking down enemies one by one. The fight intensifies when an RPG is fired their way, but even that doesn't stop them. A sentry gun activates, threatening to mow them down, but Mike reacts fast and destroys it with a grenade. The team keeps advancing. Mike eliminates enemies with ruthless focus while the others support him from outside, using an RPG to take out enemy gunners and knock out the building's generator, plunging everything into darkness. With the lights down, Mike gets the opening he needs to slip inside. He puts on night vision goggles, plants C4 next to a gas line, and moves quietly through the shadows, taking out several attackers before they even notice him. At one point, he blends in among the enemies, posing as one of them until the power comes back on. But even with the lights restored, nothing stops him. He fights his way deeper into the building, cutting down anyone in his path. During the assault, Mike gets shot but keeps going, using grenades, guns, and anything else within reach to clear a path to the president. Meanwhile, Cameron begins the live broadcast. The world is about to watch President Asher humiliated and killed on camera. Cameron beats him while Asher calmly recites the presidential oath, refusing to give his captors the fear they want. Then Cameron picks up a sword, ready to finish it. At the last second, Mike storms into the room, firing at every armed man inside and taking them all down. But by the time he reaches Cameron, his weapon is empty. With no bullets left, he faces him head-on. The fight turns brutal. Mike gets the upper hand early, but Cameron manages to stab him in the stomach. Even wounded, he refuses to fall, beating Cameron savagely and driving him back through sheer determination. Then Cameron's brother throws a grenade, giving Cameron the chance to slip away. Mike and Asher struggle to their feet and run, but enemies keep appearing from every direction. They fight through wave after wave until they're trapped, caught in crossfire from both sides. With no clean way out, Mike radios his team outside and orders them to detonate the C4. The explosion ignites the gas line, sending fire tearing through the building. As the flames spread, Mike and Asher jump into an elevator shaft to survive the blast. The explosion kills Cameron and sets the whole building ablaze. Moments later, U.S. troops storm the burning building and search the wreckage. They find Mike and President Asher at the bottom of the elevator shaft, bruised, exhausted, and injured, but alive. As they're pulled out, President Asher salutes Mike for his courage and loyalty. Mike then hands his men a device he recovered during the fight, telling them it might lead to Amir Barkhoui's location. The story shifts back to Agent Marshall, who confronts MI6 intelligence chief John after uncovering the truth. He was Barkhoui's inside source, his fingerprints exposing him in the security system. John tries to justify what he did, claiming he wanted to expose how vulnerable the country had become because of its military budget and security gaps. Marshall has no patience for his excuses and kills him. Elsewhere, Barkhoui gets a phone call. It's Alan Trumbull. In a calm, final tone, Alan tells him his plan has failed. Barkhoui refuses to accept defeat, warning that this is only the beginning. Alan's response is simple and chilling. He tells him to look outside. Before Barkhoui can react, a drone strike hits his compound, destroying him and wiping out what remains of his organization. 2 weeks later, London is slowly recovering, wounded, but starting to rebuild. Mike returns home, finally taking time to be with Leah and their newborn daughter. They name her Lynn, honoring the friend who gave her life protecting the president. As Mike sits with his family, he once again considers leaving the Secret Service behind, his resignation letter still waiting. But then he sees Alan Trumbull on television, reminding the country of its strength and resilience. Something shifts in him, and with renewed purpose, he deletes the resignation email. Before diving into the chaos of London Has Fallen, it's worth stepping back to look at where this movie sits in the franchise, because that context explains a lot. This is the middle chapter of the Has Fallen trilogy. First came Olympus Has Fallen in 2013, then London Has Fallen in 2016, and later Angel Has Fallen in 2019. By the time the sequel arrived, Mike Banning was already being molded into a proper action franchise hero. Olympus Has Fallen worked for a lot of people because it had that guilty pleasure energy, ridiculous, sure, but with a certain blunt force charm. It was violent and simple, basically a Die Hard style setup with Gerard Butler dropped into the middle of it. Not original, but entertaining enough if you accepted it for what it was. London Has Fallen tries to go bigger, a bigger location, bigger threat, more leaders in danger, more destruction, more explosions, but bigger isn't always better. That's where the sequel starts to feel shaky. You can almost feel the movie asking, what if we did the same thing again, but destroyed London this time? And for some viewers, that's enough. They want Banning back. They want the president in danger again. They want the chaos cranked up. Fair enough, as popcorn action. That formula has an audience. But the problem is that the first film already felt like a fairly limited concept. It wasn't built on deep mythology or an iconic hero with endless storytelling potential. Mike Banning is tough, loyal, and aggressive, but he isn't written with the personality or lasting identity of the great action heroes this franchise clearly wants to echo. So London Has Fallen becomes this strange sequel that's both unnecessary and completely understandable. Unnecessary because it doesn't really evolve the idea much, Understandable because studios know this kind of action sells. Recognizable star, simple mission, global threat, lots of damage. That's probably the best way to sum up its place in the franchise. It's not here to reinvent anything. It's here to repeat the formula at a louder volume. For fans, that makes it a fun continuation. For critics, it's proof the series was already running out of fresh ideas by its second chapter. The setup of London Has Fallen is simple, and honestly, that's part of why the movie moves the way it does. The British Prime Minister dies, and his funeral becomes a major international event. Leaders from around the world are expected to attend, including US President Benjamin Asher, and naturally, that means Mike Banning is there too. Since wherever Asher goes, Banning is basically the human insurance policy standing beside him. At first, the whole thing has the shape of a political thriller, a sudden death, a high-security funeral, world leaders gathering in one place, a city bracing for something important. You can feel the film trying to build tension out of that setup, and then everything goes wrong. The funeral isn't just a funeral, it's a trap. The terrorists use the event to launch a massive, coordinated attack targeting world leaders, turning London into a battlefield. Police, emergency services, public streets, landmarks, everything gets swept into the chaos. Within minutes, the film drops the pretense of calm and becomes a full survival mission. From there, the story stays simple. Banning has one job: protect President Asher and get him out alive. That directness gives the movie its engine. There's no need to pause for a deep mystery or layered investigation. The president is in danger, the city is unsafe, and Banning has to keep moving. It's a very old school, almost proudly basic action setup. But that also means the movie depends heavily on how much you buy into the premise. If the attack feels intense, the setup works. If it feels too far-fetched, the whole thing starts looking ridiculous fast. Still, as a premise, it's built for action. A global crisis squeezed into one city, a hero cut off from backup, a president being hunted in real time. It's not subtle storytelling, but it gives the film a clear direction, and in a movie like this, clear direction matters. Once the trap is sprung, the film basically says, here's the mission, here are the enemies, now run. When it comes to the writing, London Has Fallen is one of those movies that tells you almost exactly what it is within the first half hour. This isn't a story built on surprises or trying to outsmart the audience. Most viewers will probably see where things are headed long before the movie gets there. And that's not automatically a problem. Plenty of action films survive fine on a simple foundation. The issue here isn't that the story is straightforward, it's that it rarely finds a way to make that straightforwardness feel fresh. Almost every major beat follows a path you can see coming from miles away. The president is in danger. Banning refuses to quit. The terrorists seem one step ahead. A trusted system fails. The hero gets trapped. The hero escapes. The hero keeps moving. If you've watched enough action movies, the rhythm becomes familiar fast. What surprised me wasn't how predictable it was, it was how comfortable the movie seemed being predictable. There are moments where the screenplay doesn't seem interested in building suspense, as if it assumes the audience is only waiting for the next explosion anyway. Instead of unexpected turns, it mostly just pushes characters from one action sequence to the next. That's why the film often feels less like a thriller and more like a delivery system for action scenes. The political setup at the start actually hints at something bigger. A world leader dies unexpectedly, international tensions are already simmering, multiple governments are involved. There's room there for intrigue, paranoia, maybe even a deeper conspiracy angle. But the movie never really explores those possibilities. It quickly narrows down to the essentials: identify the bad guys, keep the president alive, survive long enough to reach the final confrontation. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with simplicity. Some of the best action films ever made run on simple objectives. The difference is they usually find creative ways to build tension along the way. London Has Fallen often takes the shortest route possible. The characters are largely written to serve the plot rather than the other way around. Decisions happen because the movie needs them to. Information shows up when the movie needs information. Obstacles appear when the action needs another obstacle. It creates the sense that the screenplay is constantly shuffling pieces around a board rather than letting events unfold naturally. Even Mike Banning's personal storyline feels surprisingly thin. Early on, there's a chance to explore his future, his family, and the possibility of leaving this dangerous life behind. Actually one of the few moments where he feels like a real person rather than an action machine. Then the attacks start, and those ideas mostly fade into the background. The film consistently favors momentum over character development. Whether that's a flaw or a strength depends entirely on what you're looking for. Fans of straightforward action may appreciate that the movie never slows down for emotional detours. Others may feel like it leaves potential on the table. What struck me most is that the movie constantly wants the audience to take the stakes seriously while refusing to treat its own story with the same seriousness. The threats are global, the consequences supposedly enormous, entire governments affected, yet the writing often operates with comic book logic, where everything exists mainly to keep the hero moving forward. That creates a strange disconnect. The movie talks like a serious political thriller but behaves like an old-school action fantasy. Sometimes that combination works. Sometimes it's unintentionally funny. By the end, the screenplay seems less interested in asking questions than in delivering satisfaction. The good guys win, the bad guys lose, the mission gets completed, and the audience gets the payoff it was always going to get. There's an honesty in that approach, even if it limits how memorable the story ultimately becomes. Because looking back on London Has Fallen, it's hard to remember specific plot developments. What sticks are the situations, the destruction, the escapes, the action itself. And maybe that's the clearest summary of the writing. The story isn't really the attraction. It's the track the action rides on. The biggest problem with London Has Fallen isn't that it's unrealistic. Plenty of action movies are unrealistic. That's almost part of the deal. We know the hero will survive things no normal person should. We know bullets will miss at convenient moments. We know explosions will land at just the right distance for maximum drama and minimum consequence. That's fine. That's action movie language. The issue with London Has Fallen is that it keeps asking for more belief than it's earned. At some point you stop thinking, okay, this is exaggerated, and start thinking, come on, seriously. The whole attack on London plays out like an impossible magic trick. Terrorists are everywhere. They've infiltrated police units, emergency services, security routes, official systems, seemingly every important corner of the city. They're not just prepared, they're almost supernaturally prepared. Wherever the president goes, they're already waiting. And yes, a movie like this needs danger around every corner, but here it starts to feel less like a dangerous situation and more like the script simply dropping enemies wherever it needs them. That makes the world feel fake. British security also takes a massive hit in this movie. The entire system is shown as useless, compromised, or completely unable to respond. For the story to work, London basically has to collapse in minutes. Police fail, intelligence fails, emergency response fails, every layer of protection breaks down at the exact same time. After a while, that's hard to take seriously. And then there's Mike Banning himself. Gerard Butler plays him with enough force that you understand why the movie trusts him so completely. He looks like the kind of guy who can take a punch, fire back, and keep moving. But the film pushes that so far that Banning stops feeling like a highly trained Secret Service agent and starts feeling like a bulletproof machine. Helicopter crashes, car wrecks, explosions, grenades, gun battles, close combat. He walks through things that should end the movie immediately. Maybe he gets a scratch. Maybe he looks tired for a second. Then he's right back to killing bad guys like nothing happened. It's entertaining in a very blunt way, but it kills suspense because if the hero can survive almost anything, what are we supposed to fear? That's where believability becomes more than a realism complaint. It affects tension, it affects stakes, it affects whether the audience feels involved or just watches the madness from a distance. The strange thing is that London Has Fallen sometimes seems to want the weight of a serious thriller. The attack is massive, the political consequence is huge, the president threatened in front of the whole world, and the movie wants us to feel this is a terrifying global crisis. But the logic is stretched so thin that the seriousness keeps slipping away. It's like watching a film that wants to be grounded and cartoonish at the same time. If it had fully embraced the absurdity, maybe it would feel cleaner. If it had leaned into a comic book tone, the impossible survival moments and the exaggerated terrorist plot might have gone down easier. But because the film keeps a straight face throughout, the ridiculous parts stand out even more. That doesn't mean there's no fun in it. For some viewers, that unreal quality is exactly the appeal. This is the kind of movie where you switch off your brain, except that Banning is basically made of steel, and just enjoy the chaos. You're not there to audit security failures, you're there to watch the hero fight through a city under siege. On that level, it can work. But if you need the story to pass even a basic smell test, London Has Fallen becomes exhausting. Every few minutes, something happens that feels too convenient, too impossible, or too obviously designed just to keep the action moving. That's the line the movie keeps crossing. It doesn't just bend reality, it keeps punching reality in the face and expecting us not to notice. One thing I'll give London Has Fallen credit for, it knows exactly what kind of movie it wants to be. Whether that's good or bad depends entirely on your tolerance for this style of action filmmaking. The movie actually starts slower than I expected, not painfully slow, but there's a stretch early on setting up the funeral, reintroducing Mike Banning, checking in with President Tasha, and putting the pieces in place. For a moment, it almost feels like it's preparing to be a political thriller. Then the attack happens, and from that point on, the movie hits the accelerator and forgets where the brakes are. The pacing becomes relentless. A shootout follows shootout, escape leads straight into another ambush, and characters barely have time to catch their breath before the next problem arrives. The film keeps sprinting downhill, hoping everything works out. Honestly, there were moments I admired that commitment. A lot of modern blockbusters stop every 10 minutes to explain themselves, pause for exposition, remind the audience what's happening, overcomplicate things. London Has Fallen doesn't really bother with that. Its philosophy seems to be, keep moving, and don't let people think about it too much. Sometimes that works surprisingly well. Even when the story starts stretching credibility, the momentum can carry you through scenes that probably shouldn't work. You're already on to the next chase, the next firefight, the next escape route before you've fully processed what just happened. That's a useful trick, but it's also the movie's biggest weakness, because non-stop pacing and good pacing aren't always the same thing. There were points where I felt the film was confusing activity with excitement. Just because something happens every minute doesn't mean each moment becomes more thrilling. Eventually, the constant intensity flattens out. When everything is loud, nothing feels especially loud. When every scene is life or death, individual moments stop feeling urgent. The movie rarely slows down long enough to build anticipation. Instead of building and releasing tension, it mostly holds the same elevated pitch for long stretches. Some viewers will love that, since there's almost no downtime. Others may find it oddly exhausting. That's where the entertainment value gets genuinely interesting. I've seen people absolutely hate this movie while still admitting they weren't bored. A strange achievement. There are films that are technically better but far less watchable. London Has Fallen often runs on pure momentum. You may roll your eyes at the logic, laugh at the absurd situations, question nearly every decision made, yet the movie keeps moving, and for action fans, that's often enough. If you're looking for something deep, layered, or rewarding of close attention, this probably isn't it. But if your goal is to spend 90+ minutes watching Gerard Butler run through a collapsing city, shooting bad guys and surviving impossible situations, the film delivers exactly that and no more, no less. That's probably why reactions to it are so extreme. Some viewers see a dumb action film that never pretends to be anything else and judge it on those terms. Others see missed potential everywhere and get frustrated by what it could have been. Both reactions make sense, because London Has Fallen is one of those rare movies where your enjoyment depends less on what the film is doing and more on what you expect from it going in. If you want realism, you'll probably be irritated. If you want a loud, fast-moving spectacle that keeps throwing explosions at the screen until the credits roll, there's a decent chance you'll have fun. The movie knows exactly which audience it's chasing, and the question is whether you're part of it. Action is really the reason London Has Fallen exists, not the politics, not the character drama, not the mystery behind the attack. The movie is built around movement, impact, and damage. Once the funeral turns into a trap, the film becomes a long chain of shootouts, explosions, chases, emergency escapes, and close-range violence. And to be fair, for viewers who came only for that, it delivers. There's always something happening: streets torn apart, helicopters under threat, cars chased through danger, Banning and Asher forced from one unsafe location to the next, every possible escape route turning into another combat zone. It's not elegant action exactly, but it's busy, aggressive, and constantly pressing forward. The film follows that old-school survive the gauntlet structure. Banning isn't solving the crisis calmly and strategically, he's fighting through it one body at a time. That gives the action a simple, blunt energy. He shoots, runs, fights, stabs, escapes, reloads, and keeps going. For some, that's the appeal. There's a rough kind of entertainment in watching a hero who never hesitates. Banning is written almost like a weapon with a pulse. He doesn't spend much time doubting himself. If someone stands between him and the president's survival, they're removed from the story fast. But the violence in London Has Fallen is also where the movie gets uncomfortable for a lot of viewers. It's not just violent, it takes a certain glee in the violence. The film often seems to enjoy the brutality more than it needs to. The gunfights are heavy, the body count is massive, and some moments feel designed less for tension than for shock value. That's where the tone gets messy. A hard action film can be brutal and still feel disciplined. Here, the brutality sometimes feels like the movie trying to prove how tough it is. The torture, the aggressive killings, the constant bloodshed, it slides from exciting into excessive pretty quickly. Then there's the spectacle. London Has Fallen wants every major action beat to feel enormous. It doesn't want a small, contained threat. It wants landmarks under attack, streets in panic, leaders killed, buildings exploding, an entire city turned into a battlefield. The scale is part of the sell. Some of that imagery works, as the idea of London becoming empty, unsafe, and hostile creates a genuinely eerie atmosphere, a city that feels like a maze where any uniform could hide an enemy and any road could lead to another ambush. But the spectacle is also so exaggerated that it can go numb. When the movie keeps throwing destruction at the screen, the impact wears down. A single explosion can be shocking, but 10 in a row start to feel like background noise. That's the odd problem with this kind of action. The movie is never short on incident, but incident isn't the same as suspense. A car chase is exciting if you feel real danger. A shootout is tense if the geography is clear and the stakes feel real. An explosion lands if the moment has built up to it. London Has Fallen has plenty of these ingredients, but doesn't always shape them into memorable set pieces. The action sometimes feels less choreographed than assembled from familiar parts. Still, there are moments where sheer momentum carries it. Even when the logic is gone, the film keeps pushing, and in the right mood, that can be enough. You stop asking whether anyone should survive this and just accept that banning is going to bulldoze through another wave of enemies. That's probably the fairest way to judge the action here, not refined, not especially clever, not always believable, and definitely not restrained but forceful. London Has Fallen gives action fans plenty of what they expect: gunfire, chases, explosions, close combat, desperate escapes, and a hero who keeps moving no matter how ridiculous things get. Whether that feels thrilling or exhausting depends on how much noise, violence, and impossible survival you're willing to accept before the spectacle loses its punch. Visually, London Has Fallen is one of those movies that feels much bigger than it sometimes looks, and if you've seen it, you probably know exactly what I mean. The ambition is huge. The movie wants to sell the idea that one of the world's most recognizable cities has been thrown into chaos, with world leaders under attack, landmarks destroyed, streets turned into war zones, and London itself feeling like a city under siege. On paper, that's a massive canvas for an action thriller, and sometimes the movie actually pulls it off. There are shots throughout where the scale works, seeing familiar locations suddenly emptied, threatened, or damaged creates a genuine sense of unease, even knowing you're watching a big studio action movie. There's something naturally unsettling about watching a major world capital transformed into a combat zone, and those moments give the film an identity beyond just another hero protects the president's story. The problem is that the visual execution can be surprisingly inconsistent. There were scenes where I thought, okay, this looks pretty good, followed a few minutes later by an effect that completely pulled me out of it, almost like two different movies competing with each other, one aiming for large-scale blockbuster spectacle, the other occasionally drifting into something far cheaper than the movie's ambitions. The CGI is probably where opinions split most. Some viewers will look at the destruction sequences and see exactly what they came for: collapsing structures, explosions, large-scale attacks, enough visual chaos to support the over-the-top premise. If you're mainly chasing momentum, those effects do the job. But if you're paying close attention, some of the effects feel surprisingly artificial. There are moments where the destruction looks less convincing than it should, given the scale the movie's aiming for, instead of feeling immersive. Certain shots remind you you're watching computer-generated spectacle. Once that illusion breaks, it's hard to fully get back into the scene. The cinematography itself is functional rather than memorable. It knows its job. They keep up with the action, follow banning through danger, maintain a sense of urgency. It rarely pauses for visual beauty or atmosphere for its own sake. Everything's built around movement. That works when the action is flowing, but it also means the film sometimes sacrifices clarity. There are sequences where the camera gets a little too energetic for its own good. The shaky cam style creeps in occasionally, and while it's clearly meant to increase intensity, it can have the opposite effect, making the action harder to follow rather than more immediate. Good action direction isn't just about speed, it's about letting the audience understand the geography of a scene, who's where the threat is, how the hero escapes. London Has Fallen occasionally loses that clarity in its rush to keep everything feeling urgent. What I did appreciate was the atmosphere once the attack begins, a certain paranoia running through the visuals. Empty roads, suspicious uniforms, streets that should feel safe suddenly feeling dangerous. The movie does a decent job of turning familiar environments into hostile territory, and even when the realism falls apart, that uncertainty helps sustain tension. The score plays a similar role. It isn't trying to reinvent action thriller music, but it keeps the pressure on and reminds the audience the danger is always near. It's effective in the moment, even if not particularly memorable afterward. Honestly, that describes a lot of the film's technical side. It's built around effectiveness rather than artistry. The visuals, camera work, score, and effects all exist to serve momentum. The movie wants you moving from one crisis to the next without stopping to question how convincing anything looks. climax. Sometimes that strategy works surprisingly well. Sometimes it feels like the film is trying to overwhelm you into accepting things that don't hold up under scrutiny. In the end, the technical presentation reflects the movie itself: a big ambitions, mixed execution, moments of genuine scale next to moments that look cheaper than they should, all driven by a constant determination to keep you focused on the next explosion before you've had time to think about the last one. One of the reasons London Has Fallen ended up so divisive has very little to do with the action itself. It's the politics, or more accurately, how the movie handles politics without seeming all that interested in exploring them. To be fair, this isn't a political drama. Nobody sits down for a Gerard Butler action movie expecting a nuanced discussion of international relations. That's not the assignment. The film wants to entertain first, but even action movies build a worldview whether they mean to or not. And this one has a very specific one. It operates on a pretty straightforward us versus them mentality. Heroes here, villains there, good guys protecting civilization, bad guys trying to destroy it. On a basic action movie level, that's completely normal. The problem is the film rarely moves beyond that simplicity. As the story unfolds, entire institutions start looking either incompetent or compromised. British security collapses with alarming speed. Intelligence systems fail. Police are infiltrated. Emergency services are compromised. The city becomes vulnerable almost instantly. For the plot to work, nearly every layer of protection has to fall apart at once, and that creates a strange dynamic. Instead of feeling like an international crisis involving multiple countries and agencies, the movie increasingly feels like a story where everyone fails except the American heroes. Whether intentional or not, that's the impression some viewers walked away with. It's one thing to make your hero look capable, it's another to make almost everyone else look incapable to accomplish that. That's part of where the criticism comes from. Then there's the dialogue. A few lines stand out for all the wrong reasons. They're written as tough guy moments, the kind of one-liners meant to get cheers, but instead of landing as clever or intimidating, they come across as unnecessarily crude and, in some cases, openly offensive. The issue isn't that the movie is politically incorrect. Plenty of action movies are. The issue is that some of these moments feel less like character development and more like cheap provocation. And because the film already leans so heavily on a simplistic good versus evil framework, those lines mostly just reinforce that the movie isn't especially interested in complexity. It just wants the audience to know who to root for and who to hate. The villains don't help much either. The film gives them a motivation, technically a revenge element tied to military action and personal loss. On paper, that's an opportunity for a more layered conflict, a chance to explore consequences, resentment, or competing perspectives. But London Has Fallen never really follows that path. It uses the backstory mostly as fuel for another action set piece. The result is a conflict that stays broad and simplistic even in moments that could have become something more interesting. What's fascinating is that the movie occasionally acts like it's making a serious statement. There are speeches, declarations about justice and morality, moments meant to feel emotionally triumphant. But because the film spends so little time engaging with the bigger issues it's touching on, those moments can feel oddly one-sided. It wants the satisfaction of a political payoff without doing much of the political groundwork. And that's where reactions get incredibly divided. Some viewers don't care at all. For them, it's a loud action movie, the politics are background noise, and the mission stays simple: protect the president, stop the terrorists, save the day. Others find the political tone impossible to ignore, since it's woven directly into the movie's identity. The nationalism, the rhetoric, the portrayal of institutions, the framing of certain characters. It all becomes part of the viewing experience. Neither reaction is wrong. What makes London Has Fallen interesting is that it doesn't sit comfortably in either camp, too political to be fully apolitical, but not thoughtful enough to function as meaningful political commentary. It exists somewhere in the middle, a part action fantasy, part nationalistic wish fulfillment, part revenge thriller, and depending on your perspective, that combination reads as either harmlessly entertaining or surprisingly uncomfortable. The movie clearly knows which side it's on. The question is whether the audience is willing to follow. The Villains in London Has Fallen are a perfect example of the movie almost having something interesting, then settling for the easiest version of it. On the surface, the conflict isn't completely empty. The main threat is tied to revenge. Babak isn't attacking London just because the movie needs a bad guy. He has a personal reason. His family was killed in a Western military strike, and the attack on world leaders is framed as his response to that loss. That kind of setup can work. It gives the villain a motive beyond simple evil, a sense of consequence. The suggestion that violence breeds more violence and can return later in a much bigger, uglier form. But the movie doesn't really sit with that idea. It introduces the revenge angle, then mostly uses it as a reason to kick off the action. After that, Babak becomes less a character than a remote control mastermind that organize the chaos, threaten the president, and give Banning a target to push toward. That's where the villain side of the movie feels thin. The plan itself is enormous, almost absurdly so. Terrorists have infiltrated London on a scale that feels impossible. Inside police units, emergency response systems, security routes, every major escape point. They don't just attack, they seem to have anticipated every possible move. At first, that makes them look dangerous. After a while, it makes the writing look lazy, because if the villains are everywhere at all times, danger stops feeling carefully built and starts feeling automatic. The movie can plant enemies in any scene because the plan is so absurdly wide-reaching that it covers everything. It's convenient more than clever. The terrorist enemies themselves aren't especially memorable either, mostly just bodies for Banning to fight through. They appear, shoot, chase, die, and get replaced by more men with guns. There's not much personality. They're less characters than obstacles in a violent video game level. That works fine if the goal is pure action, but it doesn't create a strong central conflict. A great action villain doesn't just create danger, he gives the hero something to push against emotionally, morally, or personally. Babak has the outline of that kind of villain, but not the depth. The movie gives him grief, anger, and revenge, but doesn't explore those feelings with enough weight to make him unforgettable. The conflict is also presented very one-sidedly. The film wants us to see the villains as cruel and dangerous, which is expected, but because it never develops them beyond the basic terrorist mastermind mold, the story misses a chance to get more complicated. There was room here for a more uncomfortable, layered revenge thriller. Instead, the movie keeps things broad and simple, maybe intentionally, since it's not trying to be a thoughtful study of violence and retaliation. It's trying to be a hard, direct action movie where the villain sets the trap and the hero breaks through it. On that level, the villains do their job. They create the crisis, raise the stakes, and give Banning endless enemies to destroy. But as characters, they're weak, generic, sometimes cartoonish, and too perfectly organized to believe. Babak's revenge story gives the film a slightly stronger starting point than a random terrorist plot would, but the movie never turns that into real dramatic tension. So the conflict ends up functional rather than memorable. It gets the movie moving, gives the hero something to fight, but never becomes as sharp, personal, or meaningful as it could have. When it comes to the performances, I think the movie survives largely because the cast understands exactly what kind of film they're in. Nobody's trying to turn this into a deep character study or deliver award season material. Most of the actors seem to recognize the film's primary mission is keeping the action moving, and they adjust accordingly. That starts with Gerard Butler. At this point, Butler doesn't so much play Mike Banning as embody him. The character is basically loyalty, aggression, determination, and stubbornness compressed into human form. A constantly running, fighting, shooting, yelling, surviving, protecting the president. There isn't much emotional range required, but Butler commits fully to the physicality of the role, and honestly, that's a big reason the franchise works at all. Because when you stop and think about what Banning survives in these movies, the character becomes almost impossible to take seriously. He walks away from things that should end anyone's story, yet Butler sells it with enough confidence that you eventually stop questioning it and just accept he apparently lives in a different reality than everyone else. The interesting thing is Banning isn't a particularly unique action hero on paper. Not especially witty, not mysterious, without a memorable quirk that separates him from dozens of other action protagonists. In many ways, he's a familiar tough guy archetype, but Butler's screen presence carries a lot of the weight. Even when the dialogue gets clunky or the situations turn absurd, he has enough natural charisma to keep the character watchable. Whether you enjoy the movie or not, it's hard to deny he's giving it everything he's got. Aaron Eckhart has a much tougher assignment. President Asher spends most of the film reacting to events rather than driving them. He's the person everyone's trying to save, which automatically limits how active he can be in the story. As a result, Eckhart often feels boxed in by the role, though that's not really his fault. The script doesn't give him much to work with beyond looking concerned, staying alive, and reminding us what's at stake. He plays it professionally, but it's not a character the movie seems especially interested in developing. Important to the plot, but not always memorable. What stood out more to me was how much potential the supporting cast had. This movie is packed with recognizable names: Morgan Freeman, Angela Bassett, Melissa Leo, Robert Forster, and others, bringing a level of credibility that instantly elevates the cast list. These are performers who can add weight to almost anything they're in, but the problem is London has fallen rarely knows what to do with them. Morgan Freeman probably fares best, since he naturally brings authority and calm to every scene. Even when he isn't doing much, his presence makes people listen, and the movie benefits from that. Still, his role feels surprisingly limited. Much of what he's asked to do involves reacting to information, managing the crisis from a distance, and looking appropriately concerned. You keep waiting for him to become more central to the story, and that moment never fully arrives. The same issue affects Angela Bassett and others. They're professional. They do exactly what's required, but many of these characters feel more like plot functions than complete people. Sometimes it feels like talented actors have been assigned to stand in a command room delivering updates while Banning handles everything important elsewhere. That's a shame, because the cast is arguably stronger than the screenplay. You can see glimpses of what these performers could bring to richer material, but the movie never really makes room for them. What's funny is that even the weaker performances aren't necessarily bad, they're just trapped inside characters without much depth. A great actor can only do so much when the script's main concern is getting to the next explosion. That's really the story of the performances as a whole. Nobody embarrasses themselves, and nobody completely steals the movie either. The cast does exactly what this type of action film asks of them: keep the audience invested enough between action scenes that the momentum never disappears. Gerard Butler carries the weight of the film on his shoulders. Aaron Eckhart provides a steady presence beside him, and the supporting cast adds credibility whenever they show up. It's a solid ensemble trapped inside a movie far more interested in action than character, and maybe that's why the performances work better than some other parts of the film. The actors seem to understand the assignment. Even when the movie occasionally loses its mind, they keep playing it straight. The supporting cast in London Has Fallen is one of those things that looks impressive on paper and then feels strangely underused once the movie actually gets going. You look at the names involved and think, okay, this should give the film some weight. Morgan Freeman, Angela Bassett, Melissa Leo, Robert Forster, Jackie Earle Haley. These aren't empty background players, they're actors who can bring authority, personality, and texture to a scene without much screen time. And yet the movie often treats them like expensive furniture in a crisis room. That sounds harsh, but it's kind of true. Most of the supporting characters are there to react, report, worry, or deliver information, while Mike Banning does the real work out in the field. They sit around tables, stare at screens, exchange serious looks, say things that remind us the situation is bad, and then the movie cuts back to Gerard Butler fighting through London. It's functional, sure, but not very satisfying. Morgan Freeman probably gets the best treatment, mostly because Morgan Freeman can make almost anything sound important even without much to do. He still brings calm authority to the room, and his presence helps the movie feel slightly bigger and more official. But even with him, there's a sense of limitation. He's important in title and tone, but not always in dramatic action. The movie keeps him at a distance from the main danger, which makes sense structurally, but it also means his role feels more symbolic than emotionally involving. Angela Bassett has a stronger tie to the immediate crisis, since her character is right there in the protection detail. She brings intensity and command, and the film clearly benefits from her presence. But again, the writing doesn't give her enough room. The character could have added a stronger emotional layer to the survival mission, especially since she's part of Banning's world and not just someone watching from safety. Melissa Leo, Robert Forster, and Jackie Earle Haley face similar problems in different ways. They're recognizable, capable actors, but the movie mainly uses them to fill out the political and security machinery around the plot, giving the film a sense of scale, like serious people are handling serious decisions, but their individual characters don't leave much of a mark. That's the real missed opportunity. A film like this doesn't need every supporting character to have a sweeping emotional arc. Nobody's asking for a slow, character-driven drama in the middle of an action sequel. But a few sharper moments could have made the world feel more alive. A strong line here, a more personal reaction there. Maybe a small conflict between decision-makers, something to remind us these are people and not just job titles. Instead, the film saves most of its energy for Banning, leaving the supporting cast feeling trapped in orbit around him. Everyone exists to underline the seriousness of the mission, but very few get to shake it in a memorable way. It's not that the performances are bad, actually. That's the frustrating part. The actors are too good for how little they're given. They bring professionalism, authority, and presence, but the screenplay doesn't meet them halfway. So the supporting cast becomes one of the film's strange contradictions. There's enough recognizable talent to suggest a richer, more layered action thriller, but the movie itself is too impatient to use that talent properly. In the end, these actors make the film feel more respectable than the material sometimes deserves, while also reminding you of the better version of London Has Fallen that could have existed if the script cared about the people in the room as much as the man holding the gun. One area where London Has Fallen really struggles is the dialogue, and what's interesting is that the movie clearly thinks some of these lines are crowd pleasers. You can almost feel it. Certain moments are written like the audience is supposed to lean forward and think, yeah, that's a cool line. Instead, a lot of them land somewhere between awkward, forced, and unintentionally funny. The biggest issue is that the movie mistakes toughness for personality. Mike Banning is written as a hard-edged action hero, which is fine in principle. The problem is the screenplay often reduces that toughness to profanity, threats, and one-liners that sound pulled from a generic action movie handbook. Instead of revealing character, many of the lines simply remind us Banning is supposed to be the toughest guy in the room. After a while, that wears thin, because a memorable action hero doesn't just have tough dialogue, he has a voice. You know who he is from the way he talks. Think about the action icons people still quote years later. Their lines worked because they reflected personality. With Banning, the dialogue sometimes feels like it's trying too hard to manufacture those moments. There are scenes where a line is clearly meant to sound intimidating, but the writing is so blunt it becomes distracting. You end up thinking about the screenwriter trying to craft a badass quote instead of the character, and that's never a good sign. The excessive vulgarity doesn't help. Strong language isn't automatically a problem. Plenty of action films use it effectively, but London Has Fallen leans on it so heavily that it starts feeling less like natural speech and more like a substitute for sharper writing. It's as if the movie assumes every sentence gets more intense simply by getting louder. It doesn't. If anything, the opposite happens. When every other line is aggressive, the impact disappears and the dialogue becomes background noise. What makes this more frustrating is that Gerard Butler actually has enough charisma to sell better material. There are moments where you can see him trying to bring energy to lines that just aren't that good. He commits fully, which is probably why some of the dialogue works better than it deserves to. But even he can't rescue every line. The film also has a habit of delivering political or moral statements that feel oddly disconnected from everything around them. There are moments where characters suddenly sound like they're stepping onto a soapbox. The movie pauses long enough to make a point, then immediately snaps back to explosions and gunfire. Those scenes never quite land because the script hasn't earned them. A speech can be powerful when it grows naturally out of a character and a story. Here, some of these moments feel inserted simply because the movie thinks it needs a dramatic statement before moving to the next action sequence. Then there are the one-liners. Some action movies live and die on them. They become part of the fun, giving the audience something to remember. London Has Fallen definitely wants those moments. Sometimes they land in a dumb, guilty pleasure where you hear the line, "Roll your eyes a little, and move on," which is part of the charm of certain action films. Other times, they're so overcooked they pull you right out of the movie. The strange thing is that very few characters actually have distinct voices. Most people speak in the language of the plot, delivering information, explaining threats, reporting developments. The dialogue often functions as a tool rather than a reflection of personality. That's especially noticeable with the supporting cast. You've got talented actors throughout the movie, but many are stuck saying things that sound interchangeable. Remove the character names and you could swap entire conversations between different people without changing much. That's usually a sign the writing isn't doing enough. And yet, despite all these issues, the dialogue isn't completely ineffective. It serves the movie's larger goal, which is speed. The script rarely slows down to explore character through conversation, because it's always racing toward the next action sequence. The dialogue exists to keep the engine running. That's probably the best way to understand it. London Has Fallen doesn't treat dialogue as an opportunity for depth. It treats it as connective tissue between explosions. Sometimes that creates unintentionally funny moments, sometimes eye-rolling one-liners, sometimes speeches that sound more important than they are. But very rarely does it produce a memorable character voice. The movie wants its characters to sound tough. The problem is that sounding tough and sounding authentic aren't always the same thing. There's a very specific kind of pleasure in watching London Has Fallen, and it has almost nothing to do with prestige filmmaking. This isn't polished, elegant, serious action cinema. Not really. It feels much closer to an older school B-movie that somehow ended up with a bigger budget and a more recognizable cast. And honestly, that might be the best way to understand why some people enjoy it. London Has Fallen has that shameless canon-style energy, blunt politics, broad villains, a nearly indestructible hero, excessive violence, a plot simple enough to sum up in one sentence. It's the kind of movie where subtlety doesn't just leave the room. It was never invited in the first place. That can be a weakness, obviously, but it's also the whole appeal, because plenty of viewers don't come to a movie like this looking for realism or nuance. They want a hard, cheesy, aggressive action ride where the hero growls his way through danger and the bad guys keep showing up just to get knocked down. On that level, London Has Fallen knows its audience pretty well. The Millennium Films flavor is all over it, a modern version of the old B-grade action machine, recognizable stars, big threats, loud set pieces, familiar formulas, and just enough production value to make the whole thing feel bigger than its script probably deserves. It's not trying to reinvent the action genre, it's trying to feed people who already like this kind of thing, and there's something weirdly honest about that. The movie doesn't waste much time pretending to be more sophisticated than it is. Once the attack begins, it basically becomes a checklist of action movie pleasures: a gunfire, explosions, narrow escapes, tough guy lines, impossible survival, and one man solving an international crisis with bullets and rage. If that sounds ridiculous, it is, but that ridiculousness is part of the texture. The problem is that B-movie fun works best with a little self-awareness, and London Has Fallen sometimes feels like it might be in on the joke, but not consistently enough. There are moments so over the top they almost become hilarious, making you wonder if the movie is intentionally leaning into exploitation absurdity. Then another scene arrives, completely serious and straight-faced, and suddenly you're not sure anymore. That uncertainty is what makes the film such a strange watch. If it had fully embraced its trashy action identity, it might have been easy to celebrate as pure guilty pleasure. If it had tried harder to be grounded, it might have worked better as a thriller. Instead, it lives somewhere in between, too silly to be taken seriously, but too serious to feel completely playful. Still, for fans of loud B-movie action, there's a certain comfort here: a same type of hero, same type of mission, same type of enemies, same type of destruction. Nothing too surprising, nothing too complicated. The movie gives you exactly what you expect, almost proudly. And maybe that's why it has defenders, not because it's great or smart, but because it scratches a very specific itch. It feels like a throwback to a time when action movies could be crude, blunt, oversized, and completely convinced a tough guy with a gun could fix almost anything. London Has Fallen isn't a refined action thriller, it's a glorified B-movie with blockbuster ambitions, and depending on your taste, that's either the problem or the reason to watch it. So where does that leave London Has Fallen? Honestly, it depends on how much nonsense you're willing to forgive in the name of action. Because this isn't a film that meets everyone halfway. It doesn't gently invite you in, it basically kicks the door open, throws logic out the window, fires a few hundred rounds, blows up half of London, and then asks if you're entertained. Some viewers will say yes, and I get it. There's a certain blunt enjoyment in watching a movie this committed to its own chaos. It's fast, loud, violent, simple, and completely uninterested in subtlety. Gerard Butler knows how to carry this kind of material, and once the action starts, the film rarely gives you time to be bored. For the right audience, that's enough. If you want a popcorn action thriller where the hero keeps moving, the enemies keep coming, and the story never gets more complicated than protect the president and kill the bad guys, London Has Fallen does exactly what it promises, not elegantly, not intelligently, but directly. But if you need the movie to make sense, even a little, it becomes much harder to defend. The plot is absurd, the politics are clumsy, the villains are thin, the dialogue often sounds like it's trying too hard to be tough, the supporting cast is better than the material, and the action, while constant, can feel more exhausting than exciting. There are moments where the film is so ridiculous it almost becomes fun by accident, but also moments where the uglier edges make that fun harder to enjoy. That's why the movie is so divisive. For some, it's trashy, loud, lazy, offensive, impossible to believe. For others, it's enjoyable trash, a guilty pleasure B-movie with bigger explosions, recognizable actors, and just enough momentum to keep the ride going. And maybe that's the fairest verdict. London Has Fallen isn't good in the traditional sense. It's too messy, too exaggerated, too politically heavy-handed, and too predictable for that. But it's not completely without appeal either. It has energy, It has pace, it has a star who understands the job, and it has that rough old school action flavor certain viewers still enjoy. So no, this isn't a smart sequel.